Good afternoon. Hello. I'm Dr. Senya Nouriel, the Gallery Director and Curator of Exhibitions and Programs here at the Art Students League. It's nice to see you all. For 420, I think 420, yeah, exactly. We are nearly done, but it's truly an honor and a pleasure to introduce the capstone for our day, which is our keynote, with Jeffrey Meris, interdisciplinary artist, and Christian Viveros-Fauné. Their biographies precede them, so I am not going to read them in great depth, and you can access them in full by clicking the QR code on your program that you got at check-in. But I think it's important to reflect on some aspects of their biographies which truly made them the perfect keynote and keynote conversant for today's proceedings. Jeffrey, never Jeff, has done so many things. He has degrees from the University of the Bahamas, Tyler School of Art, as well as Columbia University. He has been a fellow or resident at Skowhegan, NXTHVN, and the Sharpe-Walentas Studio Program, as well as Studio Museum. And I have no doubt that even more is to come, and perhaps that is what these two will be discussing, or part of what they'll be discussing on the stage today. And Christian, well, it's a veritable miracle he made it here, off the red eye from Portland, where he was guest curator of the 2023 Converge 45 Biennial in Portland, Oregon, that is, where he launched the catalog book last night, no big deal. He was a co-founder of the Brooklyn Rail. He is literally at the epicenter of so many different artists and movements over the last few decades in New York, but also very much outside New York. So I do think a lot of the themes, interests, even concerns that have been brought up throughout all the discussions today will be touched upon by these two brilliant minds and talents who are sitting with us. And again, so grateful to have them in our presence today. So without further ado, please, Christian, Jeffrey, take it away.
Thank you for being here. Can you hear me okay? Good, great. This is what you call a writer's cheat sheet. I'm going to go out to come back in, and I'll be brief. But it's by way of introducing my role as conversant with the main conversator here. I'll tell you right off the bat that I've spent the last month or so reading Richard Kapuscinski's travels with Herodotus. Herodotus, of course, was the author of one of the founding works of world literature, the Histories. In that 2004 book, the Polish writer that is Kapuscinski mixes his own stories as a foreign correspondent with those told by the man who invented history 25 years ago. The so-called father of history penned the world's first extended prose narrative about a single event in 9-volume account of the wars between Persians and Greeks between 490 and 497 BC. That work is legendarily digressive. It's 9 volumes for anyone who wants to take it on. It is, in Kapuscinski's words, not just a recording of the histories of dynasties, kings, and palace intrigues. It's also a convincing relay of information about the life of regular people, about their religious beliefs and agricultural practices, about illnesses and natural disasters, about mountains and rivers and plants and animals. One conclusion Herodotus came to after amassing information very different from about people very different from himself was that in many ways Greek culture was gathered and assimilated from places like Egypt and Libya. The same idea reworked by Kapuscinski. European culture, especially its Mediterranean manifestations, has always had serious African ancestry. No wonder many of our best contemporary artists and all of the original authors connected with the mid-20th century negritude movement came to that same conclusion. Why am I bothering you with Herodotus? Well, for two reasons. One, because I thought it was a place of cultural heterodoxy to begin this conversation. Another is that the person that I'm lucky enough to be in conversation with, this remarkable artist, Jeffrey Meris, boasts a personal and educational history as an artist that puts me very much in the mind of one of the best lessons to be drawn from Herodotus. Herodotus was born at the outer edges of the Greek colonies. He was really actually born and raised in Persia, at the outer edges of that empire. Until now, Kapuscinski wrote about a lifetime spent reading Herodotus. When we pondered our relation with the other was always from the same culture as us. Now, however, the other belongs to an altogether foreign culture, an individual formed by and espousing its distinct customs and values. Now, as a Chilean immigrant other, I'm really honored to be in conversation with Jeffrey, who is a U.S. fluent, but not quite from here, Bahamian, Haitian Bahamian, as a matter of fact. To sum up some of what Ksenia was saying before, Jeffrey is, like Herodotus, a citizen of the world, but also one who has a long history in American institutions of higher learning, right? Mm-hmm. Both universities and residencies. As a matter of fact, I think we found out in the panel that he'd been on 3 of the 4 residencies that were up here on this dais. His life in art education spans an impressive array of these schools and residencies. I'll just count some of them that were not on this dais. Tyler School of Art, of course, Skowhegan, Columbia MFA, NXTHVN, the Sharpe-Walentas Studio Program, the Studio Museum Residency, etc. There's more. So I think really few people are as qualified as Jeffrey to talk about the value of art education, both the formal and informal kind. Before we sort of kick off the conversation, and before I lose my Madonna microphone, you'll see that there's a slideshow of about, I think, what, 14 slides?
Yeah,
15
14
slides.
to 20.
To 20 running behind us on a loop. We'll refer to some of those sort of directly at some point, but we'll just sort of like get cracking with the conversation. Like Lewis Carroll said, let's begin at the beginning. What in the world made you want to become an artist, and at what age? Because I think you have your connection to art goes back. Mm-hmm. It's not an 18 or even 20-year-old thing. It's
yeah. I'd like to say first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here with us. Thank you to the Art Students League for having me, and thank you, Christian, for agreeing to hold space with me and to be the container and the scaffold by which this conversation occurs. This is a great place to start. Sweet, we hit the jackpot. Yeah. So I'm from the Bahamas. If you're trying to place my accent, that's where I'm from. And in the Bahamas, we have this festival called Junkanoo, and I grew up in this tradition. I think visually, Junkanoo sort of looks like Carnival or Mardi Gras. Don't ever tell someone from the Bahamas that, because Junkanoo is its own thing. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'll say that. The reality is, Junkanoo, Carnival, Mardi Gras, they all come from the same tree, right? They all emerge out of pre-transatlantic slave trade. And Junkanoo has roots in West Africa, and there's many mythologies about where it comes from and how it became what it is today. One of such is that John Canoe, an actual West African tribal leader from the Ahata people, which is now what would be considered Ghana. He was one of the unfortunate people that was stolen from Africa and ended up in the Bahamas, and he was this warrior, and he went to the British colonial powers, and he said, my people have to be able to celebrate our rituals. And so to this date, every year on the 26th of December, Boxing Day, because we're a former British colony, this massive parade of celebration and costuming happens. But at the core of Jonkanu really is a protest. It's a revolution. It happens in the economic city center of the country. And so I grew up in the Jonkanu Shack. That would be the equivalent of what an artist studio is. But a lot of Jonkanu people don't consider themselves artists. It's just something that's folk. It's something that we know how to do. That's lots of drawing and engineering, and you learn to manipulate steel and metal and cardboard to make these really fantastic pieces. And so that's really, I was really lucky. There's this really beautiful thing that happens in the Bahamas where a lot of artists with the capital A just so happen to also be Jonkanu people. And when I was about 11, there was a Jonkanu shack that opened right across the street from my house. And my mother would always say, you're not allowed to go there. Because back in the day, you know, Jonkanu had this sort of bad reputation where people associated it with crime and sort of like these like criminal activities. But slowly, me and my siblings snuck ourselves into Jonkanu shack, and slowly she got okay with that. And I met my first mentor, Jackson Burnside, who was this very gregarious gentleman. He was a Jonkanuer and a painter and an architect and a musician. And so he wore many hats, and as I got older, unfortunately, he passed when I was in my first year of college. He wanted me to be an architect, but I found myself saying, no, I don't want to do architecture, I want to be an artist. And so I got into the University of the Bahamas, where I enrolled in the visual arts program. Jackson unfortunately passed in my first year of college. Jackson had a younger brother, Stan Burnside, who just had a show at Periton Gallery a year ago, his first New York show.
Set up by somebody who we'll mention in a minute, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
The connection, the
Right.
connective points here are kind of crazy. So Stan really taught me this very valuable lesson, and this is why I think that it was really important to start from the perspective of Jonkanu. Stan would always say that, always remember your first education is the University of Jonkanu. There's no curriculum, there's no credits, but the lessons that you learn in Jonkanu, I see so much of that still showing up in my practice to date.
How old were you when your mom actually let you go to the Jonkanu shack?
Well, it was a slow crawl.
All right.
Started at 11, and I think by the time I was 13, she's like, okay, just make sure you know, don't get lost and make sure you do your homework. But Jackson, I'm gonna lift up his name again. Jackson was also one of those people who was very, homework first. Once you're done with your homework, then you could come and help us do the random activities. Sweep the floor, right? Because it's this massive studio space where some 50 people are working at the same time and being messy and drinking and cutting paper and using glitter and doing all these things. So they had you do the most menial thing as a kid. And the older you got, the more skills you picked up. You know, it's this sort of...
You were graduating,
yeah,
literally. Right,
yeah.
right. And what's the moment when you realize that there is this crossover between this party, right? This massive national party, which is a street party, and something more formal like art, because both Stan and Jackson are, you know, significant artists. They're very important artists. They were, rather, Jackson
I see where you're going with this, Christian.
Yeah.
So there's this artist that some of you may or may not know in this room. His name is Viveros-Fauné. I met Tavares when I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And I think Tavares was at the time doing his MFA at Yale. No, Tavares had just finished his MFA at Yale. And he did this project, The Distance Between What We Want and What We Have, which is this really poetic project where he shipped a 2-ton block of ice from the North Pole to the Bahamas, and it was kept frozen in the solar freezer. And I just remembered everyone in the city that was interested in art, remotely interested in art, being like, did you hear, did you know, da, 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 da.
This is in the Bahamas.
This is in the Bahamas.
Right,
I was
right.
14 at the time.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, Viveros-Fauné, this artist who everyone was talking about, was in the same Junkanoo shack as me. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. So you mean that someone that looks like me, someone that's from my neighborhood, and someone that understands me is doing this thing in the world? And that was the aha moment for me.
He's not a full generation older than you. I looked it up. He's 11,
Yeah.
he's 11 years older than you.
Not full generation,
Yeah,
but I think in
getting
terms
there.
of practice.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, he's doing this and you're still a teener.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
You haven't gone to the College of the Bahamas yet.
No, this
Right,
was
okay.
pre-College
Yeah,
of Bahamas.
So I imagine this thing is massively sort of revelatory for you. And in fact, actually, can I just like ask in general, like how many people have heard of this project? Right? I mean, so this project not only leaves the Arctic, right? It's a 4.5 ton block of ice that's then essentially encased in a refrigerator that's solar powered. And it winds up, obviously, in very different climes in the Bahamas, and it's exhibited there. Then it's exhibited in New York, and then it goes to Venice, right? And it made a real impact. I mean, it was tremendously revelatory for me to conceive of it and see it. I can only imagine what it might have done for you.
Yeah, I think that was
Game changer is the...
No, completely,
Yeah.
right? Because not only was it this super unconventional material for an artist to be working with, but an artist from the Bahamas nonetheless, right? Because at that moment in time, I understood art to be landscape painting.
Right.
And maybe some ceramics, and that's about as far as my imagination can go.
I've had numerous conversations with artists, from veterans like, I don't know, Chuck Close to much younger people who always landed on like that eureka moment where they actually met a live artist, and that was like a category revolution for them, where they understood, oh shit, this actually is a way to go through life. This is like being a doctor or like being a policeman or like it is a category to which I can aspire and hopefully belong.
Yeah.
And I assume, certainly that happened with you seeing that work by Tavares's. But I imagine it also probably happened with the Burnside brothers to some degree, or maybe it happened later for you with them.
Yeah, I think that Jackson was pretty adamant. Both Jackson and Stan were pretty adamant that, Junkanoo comes second. It's education that comes first.
Right.
Make sure you have, oh, cool, that's Junkanoo. That's what modern day, not this, but the prior image, this is what it looks. It's like you really have to see it in person because it's like this drumming and cowbelling and a brass section, and it's this high energy, and you feel it really in your spirit, right? And the idea is you revel from midnight until the morning. But yeah, Jackson and Stan both were very much education first. Make sure you do well in school, right? In a very formal sense. And so they really put me in this position to, neither of my parents went to college, right? And so having that sort of mentorship in my life was really important from very early on.
In a previous conversation, I think you told me that Jackson offered to help pay for your schooling.
Yeah. So the one caveat was that Jackson wanted me to be an architect, and that didn't work out. not that it's a bad thing, but he wanted me to be an architect, and I was like, nah, dude, you are making art. I want to do that thing that you're doing. But I think now that I've had the amount of time to look back and be introspective with my practice, I realize that architecture and art, it's, you know, they're basically, essentially the same thing, right? But I ended up having grades that were sufficient enough that Jackson offered to pay for me to go to school in the Bahamas, but my grades were good enough that when I applied to the College of the Bahamas, I got a full scholarship, and I was able to study whatever I wanted, and being the tiny bit of rebellious me that I am, I did an Associates of Arts in Arts and Crafts. And
Is that what was available? Is that the...
That's it.
Okay.
And that's all we have to this date.
To this day, an associate's degree in visual art?
Yeah, you can do a bachelor's degree, but it's in art education. And so you're studying to be an art teacher and not really a fine artist. So the highest, what happens is you do this associate's degree and then you either stop and try to practice as an artist there, or you continue on into the art education program, or you go off to school.
Like, by the way, I believe Jackson did. I think he did architecture. I don't remember where, but in the States.
Yep, and Stan Burnside, who's his brother, was the first Bahamian to ever go off to school to study art.
Right. So again, I mean, there's an aspect of mentorship here that's really important, both with the Burnsides and then, you know, with Strong, you know, at some level. So you do, what is it? 2-year, 4-year program?
2 years in the Bahamas.
In the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what are you thinking? I mean, the reason we're going through the educational biography this way is because I want to set up sort of points of comparison. You know, so you know, before the 2 years is up, you have an idea that you're going to do something else, right?
Yeah.
And that is, what were you thinking at the time?
So I got into the associate's program, and I always knew that it was a system by way of. I knew that I knew that doing some time in the Bahamas would have made going off to school more affordable, because then I would have less time, but it also would have made me a more competitive applicant, right? Because I was coming straight out of high school. And so I finished the associate's program, and as I was finishing up, I heard of this Rhode Island School of Design. It's like, any serious artist, when I was in sophomore year, if you wanted people to take you serious, you went off to school, and going off to school meant RISD. And so I applied for RISD. I got into RISD, but I didn't have RISD money. And I got the scholarship, the Harry Seymour Memorial Scholarship from the Life of Key Foundation. I was the first applicant in the Bahamas to ever get that award.
They only give out one, yeah?
One award per year.
Per year, yeah.
I was the first applicant to get that award.
And it doesn't just cover the visual arts, it covers the
art
arts
and
in general.
music.
Arts and music, literature.
Yeah. And this award is given to one student going off to school, and with preference to graduate students. And so I was the first student to ever win that award at the undergraduate level. And so I got it in 2012, and to my chagrin, I didn't have the rest of the money to go off to school to RISD. And RISD also wanted me to do this transfer program that would have increased my tuition by another $12,000 because I was coming from an international school. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'll see you in the fall. And so in mid-July, when I emailed and I said, hey, I need to get my F1 student visa together. What can you send me the documents that I need? Their admissions responded and said, hey, we're really sorry, but you have to do this program. We're going to save you a spot for the following year. And Life of Key essentially came back to me and said, hey, you have to use this award within the next academic year. Otherwise, we're going to defer it to the next candidate. Yeah, and I Subsequently applied to a school in Philadelphia at Temple University, Tyler School of Art. I didn't know a lot about this program, but after doing a little bit of digging and a little bit of research, I'm like, oh, faculty here isn't half bad. And state-of-the-art facilities. The art school had just bought this new building, and it was really highly ranked. The tuition was nearly half of RISD, of what RISD was. And I ended up going to Tyler School of Art.
Yeah, and it's a terrific program. And I'm wondering what you remember from that. What was the curriculum like? What did they teach you, essentially?
Boy, oh boy. So I started Tyler in the spring of 2013, and I'm from the Bahamas. The Bahamas, the coldest it gets is about 70 degrees year-round. And I moved to Philadelphia, and the second day that I'm there, there's a snowstorm. My bag is left in Philadelphia International Airport because I flew 2 different airlines and they didn't connect my bag. And so I moved into dorms and I had nothing. So first semester was really rough. I think a lot of people found out that Tyler was my second choice and that RISD was my first. And so everyone was like, oh, so you think you're better than us because you got into RISD? And it's the first time in my life that I'm being introduced to these concepts like social practice and performance art and these relational aesthetics. All of these theories, what are you talking about? I'm used to painting and sculpture with some ceramics, let me live. And so my first semester was really hard. I came very close to failing, but I had a conference with the head of the department and the sculpture professor that I had 2 classes. And they were like, look, we're not going to fail you because, you know, we get it. It's your first semester, transitioning, blah, blah, blah. But that was a really hard semester.
I mean, that's a remarkable learning curve, you know, to go from, I mean, everything you learned in the Junkanoo Shack, but also from imagining art being what you said, being essentially sort of like, you know, dirtying a piece of cloth, paint on canvas, or sculpting to social practice. I mean, that's a head scratcher for a good, solid sort of, you know.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was that first semester, it wasn't smooth. But then that summer, I remembered all of the reading assignments and all of the artists that we were looking at. I took all of that information and I essentially spent the summer really, really digesting it in this really slow way. I made a bunch of work that summer, and the Bahamas, we have this award, the Central Bank of the Bahamas Art Competition, which is awarded to one artist every year, and it's winner take all. So I made this piece that was essentially social practice based. And that piece,
you learn fast, man.
You got to.
Yeah, no,
right?
well, there you go. That's the thing. You know?
So I made this piece over the summer, and then this work, it ended up turning into about 50% of my coursework for the fall semester. So I ended up having to travel back and forth between the Bahamas to Philadelphia. And I was broke. I would fly, I remember one time I flew JetBlue from Philadelphia to Boston, Boston to Fort Lauderdale, overnight in Fort Lauderdale, Nassau the next morning. But I won the competition, and I think the prize was $10,000. I paid my tuition with the money that semester. And slowly, the sort of icy relationship that I started at Tyler started to transition into like, oh, you're cool. Come, let's do a studio visit. My professors would take me to their studios, and I ended up becoming really close to the graduate students at my time at Tyler. And that was really, again, another aha moment where my experience as an undergraduate became less about coursework or assignments, but instead a life practice in a way.
So how long are you in Philadelphia, basically?
2.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's next?
2.5 years, I applied for this residency, my first residency out of undergrad in New Jersey, Guttenberg Arts. I did that residency. It was really quick. Immigration trouble.
Yeah, this is another thing I actually sort of wanted to touch on, because not only are you finding money for tuition and room and board, but there's also immigration to deal with.
Yeah.
Never mind the fact that, like, you haven't seen snow at least the first year, and there's all the thing about a new place, a new country, new customs, all that business.
Yeah, so after I did Gutenberg Arts, I moved back to the Bahamas, and it took me a really long time to finish my undergrad. It was about 7 years from start to finish. And so by the time I finished undergrad, I was 25, and I knew, okay, I've had enough experiences, and I've been to Europe, and my time in undergrad, and that I think grad school is the next move for me. And so I took a year. So you get 1 year of study after being on a student visa here, and then during that 1 year of study, post that 1 year of study, I said to myself, okay, I'll apply to graduate school. And so I spent the next few months working on new work and applying to grad school. And I got some offers, and Columbia made sense for me. And I went to Columbia where I did my MFA.
And you know, not everyone in this room has undergone the MFA process.
Mm-hmm.
And all MFA programs, well, not all MFA programs, but many are quite different. How does the MFA program at Columbia work? Is it a lot of instruction, or are they teaching you to paint, teaching you to sky, right? No, not so much?
Absolutely not.
Right, good.
So, Columbia, which I love dearly, I think about Columbia, honestly, as a real estate company that offers degrees. But I had a great time there, and I made lots of work, and I made some really good connections. And the program is really very self-motivated. You can go through Columbia without actually not making work. Like, there's not really, it's pass-fail, but there's not really any, you know, when you're paying $65,000 a year.
Now we're talking turkey.
You know, there's not an option to, what do you mean you're going to fail a customer that's giving you all of that money, right? And so, but the program itself, if you're focused, you'll do really well there. You know, and it's all about research. You treat the studio as a research scientific sort of quasi-scientific environment. And it's lots of studio visits with leading professionals in the art world. There's mentorship. I had
Many of whom, are actual faculty there. I mean, Sarah Z, John Kessler, you know.
Rick Tervanija,
right.
Thomas Fu Daniels,
Right.
Sable Lee Smith. At the time that I was there, Sanford Biggers, and so it was this really incredible program.
Right.
I think that where Columbia lacked in resources and facilities, it really made up in intellectual property. And another interesting thing about grad school, shout out to the people in the Bahamas that support me, because I couldn't have done this without them, but I applied to that same Harry Seymour Life at Key Foundation Art Scholarship, and I was the only recipient of that award to get it a second time. And so that really helped me be able to move through.
So this is probably a good time to underscore how good one has to be, not just as a student, but as a, student of life, and really being good at applying for grants.
Oh yeah,
Right?
I think
this
that
is an absolutely 1,000% necessary process.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of my ability to do things in the world is because I tried to accumulate as little debt as possible, and just apply to just try to, like, debt really scares me, right? And I was lucky to get both my undergrad and grad degree, and I think I graduated with about like $10,000 worth of debt, which really gave me the flexibility to apply to residencies where I probably wasn't being like I wasn't making any money, but I didn't have to worry too much of this massive figure looming over me that's increasing by the minute.
Yeah, it wasn't $100,000.
Yeah,
it was 10K.
Yeah, which was
which
way more manageable than
right.
Yeah.
Which I understand. I don't know if it was your first piece, but you sold a piece and you paid that off.
Oh yeah, I got COVID in 2021, and I saw my life flash before me, and in that moment I said, you know what? I don't want to have any more debt, at least not student loan debt, not college debt. And so I called the bursar's office, and turns out they sold the debt to a debt collection company, which is a whole other can of worms. I paid the debt collection company, and they gave me a degree that I've never used. It just sits in this random drawer in my house, but yeah.
In our previous meeting in your studio, you said that grad school was a sort of gumbo, a number of direct and indirect influences, which includes, of course, the art available in the city. Since we're talking about formal and informal education, I know, I mean, listen, Philadelphia is a great museum city.
Yeah.
It's not such a great gallery city,
Nope.
though there's a few. But coming to New York, I mean,
Yeah,
what a resource, right?
I think Philadelphia is a great city. Sorry if anyone from Philly is here, but I think it's a great city if you're a dead artist, because there's a bunch of museums filled with lots of great art by dead artists, right? But if you're a living artist, it's really tough. I've been really lucky to be in New York and primarily living off of fellowships and grants and awards and selling art, and I don't imagine that's something that I could have been able to easily do in Philly. But yeah, and I think to the point of thinking about New York City as being a part of my education, right? There's no shortage of museums, no shortage of nonprofits that support artists and that have. I remember my first time going to the Studio Museum in Harlem, right? And also subsequently during my time in graduate school, I reached out to the Studio Museum, and we're both along 125th, right? It's a 10-minute walk between Columbia, 15-minute walk between Columbia University MFA studios and Studio Museum in Harlem. And I write to them, I was like, hey, can you all come to my studio? And they came. And this is before I applied, and I applied the first time and I got rejected, and applied again, it worked out.
Yeah, so there are all these sort of extracurricular, as it were, classrooms around the city for you to take advantage of. Skowhegan, shall we talk about Skowhegan for a minute?
Yeah.
Is that the next thing? Is that the next
Yes.
chapter?
So I did my MFA at Columbia. We got to go back a little bit, actually. When I was at Tyler School of Art, I had this really fantastic professor, Karen Olivier, who's now the head of the sculpture department at Tyler School of Art. And for our final assignment in senior sculpture, we had to each apply to 3 opportunities, a mock application. And one of the things that I ended up applying to was Skowhegan mock, because Karen had worked as a dean at Skowhegan that summer, and so that's how I knew about Skowhegan. And so she was giving me feedback on my application, and then she said, you actually have to apply to this now, right? I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I didn't apply because I was really insecure during my undergrad. But fast forward to grad school, and I knew that I just had this feeling that this is where I needed it to be. I knew that grad school was this really intense 2 years of making and conversations, and so I applied during my second year, and I got in, and again, one of those scenarios where money wasn't a prohibitive factor, because Skowhegan and Columbia had this 50-50 match deal. If you get in as a student or recent alum, Columbia pays half, and Skowhegan covers the next half.
Because it's $6K, I believe, Skowhegan, yeah?
Yeah, but they've done a lot of development work to really, basically anyone that gets in now, money shouldn't be the thing that stops you from going.
Right. You just mentioned a second ago that you weren't so terribly confident at some point. I mean, right now you're oozing confidence, dude. No, but seriously, the previous panel, and I sort of took quick note. You want to explain what this is?
Yeah, so at Skowhegan, there's all these committees. Everyone that goes to Skowhegan, because it's very commune. We work, we play, we eat, we make art together. And that can be very unsettling at first, but everyone has to be on a committee and give some sort of work. And I found myself on the party committee, which I wasn't very...
You don't say.
I was on the party committee during my time at Skowhegan, and I was just like, wait, so you mean to tell me that I have an entire MFA in visual arts, and I know how to weld, and I know how to do all these crazy handsy things, and y'all gonna put me on the party committee? But it was great, and we threw amazing parties, and ironically, I'm on the host committee for the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture Award Gala.
Clearly, something else you were really good at that you didn't quite know. Listen, no, but on that, but what I was going to mention before is in the previous panel, there was discussion of folks at that end of the application process speaking about a confident practice, meaning artists who have a confident practice, right? Folks who are good at storytelling, yet you just described yourself at that point as not being quite there. Is there a moment where you, I mean, I don't imagine it was like a eureka moment like Junkanoo or like, or Tavares Strong's piece, but is there a moment where you go, okay, yeah, I got this thing? Or you recognize that you have that confident practice?
You know, I think that this is a difficult question.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's days where I wake up and I'm like, what am I doing, right? What is this work? Where's this work going, right? So I think there's an ebb and a flow of I can confidently stand behind this, but I think at the same time, sometimes it's a little bit unjarring to walk in a room and people are like, oh, I know you. And I'm like, do you know me? You know my CV, you don't know me. But no, but I think at the same time there is this moment of I think maybe it's also this culture that we live in where, you know, we're constantly being fed that you're not good enough or you're not making enough, right? Or you're not visible enough. And it's like, wait a minute, what if I just stop and just accept everything that I have and appreciate and really go back to 14-year-old Jeffrey, right? Like, just imagine how proud 14-year-old Jeffrey would be of Jeffrey today.
That'll take care of imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
which is a bitch. It never seems to quite go away, at least for some of us.
No.
You told me in an earlier conversation that Skowhegan gave you a wider sense of community, and that, according to you, it sort of asked you to get your own voice. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a distinguishing feature for you in the experience.
Oh yeah. I think on the community end of things, there's an image around here floating. During the pandemic, during the early days of the 2020 COVID pandemic, one of the first communities that sort of coalesced that I was a part of was the Skowhegan Alumni Network. And we would get on Zoom and read books together and play music and have dance parties. And yeah, so, and even to this day, some of the people who I talked to, one of Patricia Ayres, me and her talk just about every day, right? And it's not like, and it doesn't feel overwhelming or too much. It feels genuine and authentic. Some of my first shows that I was in was because of artists that I went to Skowhegan with. And I think in terms of finding my voice, Skowhegan was the first time that I really had the space and time to just be. There wasn't someone saying that there's a critique in 2 weeks. or there's shippers coming in 5 days. It's like, no, you just get to hang out with your work and have conversations with artists, or not make work, or just think about what you've made over the last 2 years and try to put that into context, or think about the trajectory of where you want to go.
Maybe there's a point of contrast here with, and I think in really interesting and absolutely not negative ways with NXTHVN, because NXTHVN, from what I heard here, from the previous panel and also from our conversations, is far more professionally oriented. Yeah. So I'm interested in drawing these distinctions between the places you've been at. I mean, this is kind of the reason why I want to go through this.
Yeah, I think in a diagrammatic sense, like each one of these institutions has their own strengths or the things that they help to foster, and definitely at NXTHVN there was the sense of intense programming, of structure, of how do you file your taxes, and how do you care for your body
you
when
you had a tax accountant workshop, right?
We did.
I mean,
yeah.
You know, I could use one of those.
You know, there's a specialist, a public speaking specialist that comes from TEDx and teaches you how to give public speaking, right? Titus would come at random hours of the day, night, and be like, yo, Jeffrey, you there? And you have to be ready to give your elevator spiel, right?
Yeah, because you mentioned
you know,
Serena Williams might be in tow.
Yeah, Swiss Beats. Anyone's bound to come at any given time, and so you have to, you know, it's a little bit, sometimes a little bit unsettling, but you have to be ready. But I think there's many things that I walked away from that program with, but definitely this idea of thinking about the more professional aspects of the studio practice.
And then Sharpe-Walentas, right?
Yeah.
Socrates somewhere in there. This is right during and after the pandemic, and I think some of the work that we're looking at is I'm trying to remember the name of the. It'll flash in a second, but the one with the plants.
Yeah, Catch a Stick of Fire. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe you made that, or you were thinking about making that initially during the pandemic. Yeah?
Yes, yeah. So this thing happened in my practice where, prior to the pandemic, I think the work that I was making was very much grounded in thinking about the ways in which I can control the way that my body reads in space, thinking about racialized violence and trauma and these very heavy societal things that that's way beyond me. And the pandemic rolls around, I'm at NXTHVN, and I start to have these experiences where I realize that this violence is so casual, right? It's on our cell phones, it's in the news, it's the hashtags, right? How can I be counter to that? How can I be restorative and generative in my practice? And so the work became about a sense of care and futurity for me. And so I started to make these chandelier works where the work was, I was thinking a lot about care, and I created this mythological space called the Institute of Self-Care. And the idea with that was that was a way for me to utilize these tactics to care for myself, but also employ those strategies inside my sculptures. So living plants and matter started to show up inside the work, and it's been something that I'm still thinking of and with to this date. After NXTHVN, I moved to New York City. Tavares is like, yo, I need you to come down to the city. You need to leave New Haven. Come, you're gonna grow here. And so I moved down, and one of the first programs I did was Socrates Sculpture Park. And I was very much thinking about the chandelier care plant works. And that also transitioned into my time at Sharpe-Walentas Studio Program. Yeah.
I mean, there's a way in which those pieces and even earlier pieces that you've done with cinder block and with other, very basic looking elements are, am I right in thinking that they're monumental or anti-monumental? Maybe?
Yeah, I think that definitely have a keen interest in this idea of dismantling what a monument is and how it can function. The catch a stick of fire, that's a phrase that Jackson Burnside would say before he passed, right? And so in some ways I think about that as being a monument and a memorial at the same time to him as well. Yeah. And a lot of this work also, this piece to the left, The Block is Hot, that work I was thinking a lot about. Around that time, there was all these public discussions about the Robert E. Lee monuments, and those Confederate monuments throughout the country were coming down, right? And so really thinking about those works in relationship to that whole conversation as well.
And you're using just really everyday material, a lot of stuff that you can literally sort of go out. You don't need to go to, the art supply store to get, right?
Yeah.
Or,
I got called a construction worker
there you go.
a few days ago, and I thought that was so beautiful. Like, this is the greatest honor of my life.
All right, so in 2022, you get a call from the Studio Museum. Thelma Golden gives you a call.
I did.
Yeah. What was that like?
I'm blushing. I'm blushing right now, if you can't tell. But yeah, it was at Sharpe-Walentas Studio Program, and I applied to Studio Museum because something inside of me told me, Jeffrey, and I think that a lot of times when I apply to things, it's often like this, where I get this really good feeling, or maybe this isn't for you kind of feeling, and you just follow the sound of that voice. And so I applied to Studio Museum in Harlem, and sometime in mid-July, I got an email, and the email is like, the Studio Museum curatorial, hey, we're gonna call you on Monday, are you free? And I'm like, what do you mean, am I free? Of course I'm free. But in my head, I'm like, oh, whoa, call me on Monday. Did I plagiarize someone's application? Am I in trouble? And I literally didn't sleep that entire weekend. And Monday rolls around, I'm in my studio at Sharpe-Walentas, and I get the call, and it's Yelena Keller, who I absolutely adore. And on the other side is Thelma Golden, and she goes, hey, Jeffrey, we just want to congratulate you. We want you to be an artist in residence at the Studio Museum 2022-2023. And I completely lost it. Like, even now I'm kind of stumbling over the words, but it's just one of those kinds of experiences where when you think about the cultural impact that the Studio Museum has had on visual culture over the last few decades, it's almost unbelievable to think, okay, so me and David Hammonds, right, and Simone Lay, and Titus Kaffar, and Kevin Beasley, me and all of these artists now share this lineage together. Yeah. Thank you.
You told me that your residency at the Studio Museum learned you that you didn't have to do everything, quote, beyond your own 10 fingers. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, that was a very expansive moment for me, because prior to Studio Museum, I was doing the welding, and I was doing the casting, and I was doing the material sourcing, and the drawing, and the electrical work, and all this stuff. And then at Studio Museum, it's like, oh, you mean I can hire fabricators to help me? I can hire an engineer that understands this work. I can hire an architect to make this rendering that's going to be super sexy and make my life easier and help me work through ideas. But simultaneously, I found this really amazing young artist who was coming out of his senior year at SVA, who's now been my assistant for the last 2 years, Kyle Warner. And he was a giant part of my time at Studio Museum, because he helped me make and lift and do so many other things that my 10 fingers alone couldn't have.
I think we're approaching sort of the end of at least my question. No. But I do want to I want to ask you two things. One is in that conversation in your studio last week. You admitted that, and this is your quote, art school doesn't teach you how to navigate systems of power, and I thought that was obviously beyond interesting. Can you elucidate on that a little bit, and then I've got sort of a follow-up.
Yeah, so I'm very honored to be one of the exhibiting artists at Prospect New Orleans.
There you go, yeah.
Curated by Ebony Patterson and Miranda Lash. Please come, it's going to be fantastic. Prospect runs from the 28th of October to the 2nd of February, 2025. Oh, my Skowhegan family, Miss Tamashi Jackson, and Azza and Chase. Like, we had the craziest year at Skowhegan. So many people who are doing incredibly well, who are just some of the best people that I love. But back to Prospect. So I got invited to do Prospect, and we've been having these conversations for about 2 years now. And Prospect was always this triennial that I absolutely adore. Let's see, hands up of people that know what Prospect is. Okay, we have a little bit of education to do.
Oh, yeah,
so,
right.
Prospect New Orleans was founded in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, Louisiana, right? A bunch of artists and people left New Orleans, and this group of artists and thinkers came together, and basically the idea was, how do we bring art and culture and economy back to New Orleans? And so since 2005, I think the first one might have been 2006, but it now occurs on a triennial basis. So every 3 years, about 50 to 60 artists nationally are invited to realize citywide projects in New Orleans. And I'm one of the artists that's exhibiting in the next Prospect. And when I was invited, I knew that my work that I wanted to propose had to, in some ways, point back to the Caribbean, had to point back to the Bahamas, because I've been living in New York for nearly 8 years now, and my relationship to home. This is a part of the project this work, this image has been very, let's say, educational. Let's use that word for now. But I knew that the work that I wanted to present for Prospect had to, in some ways, connect back to the Bahamas. And so I'm doing a 2-site project. 50% of my project is in Nassau, Bahamas, and then 50% is in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was really interested in how lighthouses, my first time in New Orleans, one of the things that stuck out to me was these lighthouses. There's all these abandoned lighthouses. And it's the same in the Bahamas. We have these lighthouses, they're called the Imperial Lighthouses, about 18 of them. Only one currently works. And so I knew that I wanted these two structures in some ways to communicate to one another. And initially the idea was that I wanted to install this banner around the lighthouse lantern room, and the idea was that when the light passes, without giving too much away, please come to New Orleans. The idea was that when this light passed through the lantern, the lantern room oscillates through this banner, this text that reads, this text is illuminated. I won't say what the text is, but we've since transitioned from that project, and the project that I'll be exhibiting in 2 months, in a little bit less than 2 months, is utilizing light in this Morse code sort of way. And at the time, I was thinking almost primarily through the lens of a visual artist, as someone that makes sculpture, not thinking about the larger sort of ecological system. And so when I represented go back to the drawing board, okay, we don't have $500,000 to make this fantastic idea work. What can we do on a tighter budget? All right, okay, let me think. What about Morse code? Okay, cool, let's do that. And the curators come back to me and they're like, we actually, let's talk about it. So it turns out that we had to talk to the US Coast Guards, right? Because we're using light that's navigational, and we don't want this to be misread as maybe an emergency situation or to cause some sort of like big panic. And so many conversations with the US Coast Guards later, they're like, "You're good, man." And now we go to the Bahamas, where it's not just Coast Guards, but the Bahamas is this, we like to say that we're independent, but sometimes that's kind of questionable because we still have these rigid colonial, very, very colonial ways of doing things, and so everything's super bureaucratic. But they're really great. Bahamas people, I love you. I'm not trash talking you. But in the Bahamas, we ended up having to work with the Civil Aviation Authority of the Bahamas. And I don't think grad school really prepared me to know how to wear a suit and tie and navigate these different offices. But one of the first few questions that the director asked me when I finally got a hold of him is, "Why are you using light? Why are you talking to me? And how is this art?" But I think that third question really, sometimes you take it for granted, right?
That you have to, I mean, you know, you take it for granted that you've got to convince a teacher or an art critic or, you know, somebody else, but not the fellow who's, who's
in layman's
setting up the agency.
In layman's terms, how is this art?
Yeah.
Right, as simple as that question sounds, I think that there's a lot of validity to it. And, you know, we ended up developing a really great relationship, and we got a permit. And I think a lot of the work was that sort of negotiation, that back and forth dance between the two of us.
And only stuff that you could learn literally sort of on the job, on that particular sort of job.
Yeah.
For those of you who've not heard about Prospect before, it really is the most important citywide biennial in this country, right? Far and away. Two quotes from, of all people, Gore Vidal, who's a snake of a speaker and a writer, to prompt a last question. Certain artists and writers mistake the university for the universe. That's quote one. And quote two, the whole point of education is self-education, which I think brings us back a little bit to what we were just talking about now. And my last sort of prompt or question for you is this: someone as expansively educated as you are now. I mean, because as we just relayed, you've been through all these different institutions. Do you find yourself in a situation where, after learning, you're doing some significant unlearning?
That's a great question. I like to think about it as I mean, I'm going to go back to I'm going to go to Octavia E. Butler, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. One of my dear friends, Tamashi Jackson, who I did Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture with, she started this reading group during the pandemic, and we would meet every Sunday, and we read the parables. And in the parables, Octavia has this character, Lauren Olamino, who invents this religion called Earthseed. And Earthseed is about being observant, about being in the world, right? It's not this, the Earthseed is a religion, right? And the idea is that it's not supposed to be sort of mystical or this like spiritual thing that is separated from reality. But one of the core tenets of Earthseed is education, right? And everything teaches you a lesson, right? Every experience, good or bad, everything that you manifest, like you observe the rocks, you observe the wind, you observe the dude that's coming down the street that's going to burn your house down. There's education and all of that. And so I like to think about it more as like a composite, right? You're just compiling things in, and eventually I'm going to come back to that and take the thing that I need from that experience and apply it to the space where it needs to be.
Beautiful. I think we're probably at that point where we should take questions from the audience. So anyone, please sort of raise your hand. And right before we take the first question, let me take that loop that you just mentioned and say, because we started out the conversation this way, with Stan Burnside, that the person who gave Stan Burnside the show at Paraten in 22 was Tavares Strong, right? Question, please. So it all comes back round.
So I have the mic over here.
Thank you for this very informative discussion. Jeffrey, I identify with your story, being a Caribbean artist immigrating to America and experiencing, all that America has to offer. With the amount of different experiences you've encountered through education, how much does your identity from the Bahamas and the lineage of Haitian blood running through you, how much does that help to, not help, but how much does that assist you in grounding you as you are growing in the world? Just curious as a...
Yeah, I think that, so I grew up in the Bahamas in a very, very Haitian household. My mother cooked Haitian food, and we spoke the Haitian language in the house. And she wanted us to know that we come from a people, right? The media is going to tell us that we eat pets in Springfield, Ohio. But she's like, no, buddy. Haiti was the first country in the world to abolish slavery, the first black country, the first black nation to write its own constitution. So that's the education that my mother gave me. And I think in some ways that sort of benevolent, strong-willed, in the first face of adversity, maybe maybe I think about it more largely as a guiding force, but not particularly about I make work about 1804 or red, white, and blue. Yeah, I think about it more as like as like architecturally. These are foundational principles that my mother instilled in me, and so they percolate somewhere in my mind, somewhere in the back of my practice.
Do you feel that you're strengthened by having extra American sort of references?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that leaving the Bahamas really gave me the perspective to really be able to put these things into perspective and not just be in it. You can kind of zoom out.
Yeah, I hate quoting Christopher Hitchens because I think he went all wrong towards the end of his career. But he has this line about internationalism being the only proper form of patriotism. I'd say colonialism, cosmopolitanism is the better term, but yeah, I think not being quite from here, not being quite from any place is a really good reference point to hold on to, as tough as it is to live it out,
Yeah, no, I still struggle with this, right? Because I left the Bahamas at a really sort of formative time in my life. I was just beginning to figure out who I am as a person, and so not quite here and not quite there. There's always this sort of like
Asian, Bahamian,
and this
US.
Transplant in the Northeast, right?
Snow for the first time.
All of it, all of the above.
Here.
Hello. Could you go a little more in depth on that period of transition between your initial conception of art as landscape painting and maybe pottery, and then what you encountered at your undergraduate and the sort of expanded view of what art could be, and how you navigated that change?
Sorry, one more time?
Could you please go a little more in depth on the period in your undergraduate when you went through this transition from your sort of initial understanding of what art was, like landscape painting and maybe pottery, to what it is today, this sort of more expanded view? Because I think that's not a very intuitive development. So how did you kind of navigate that?
I think for me, luckily, I had the structure of school to put these assignments in place, and having to present something I critique, and I would make a working critique, and everyone would be like, aha, that's such a bad sculpture. I'd be like, boo, I'm crying. But that was my first semester in undergrad, and right, because the other students, they had 2.5, 3 years to really cement an idea, an identity around what it means to produce art. They had these world-class global museums that was making thought-provoking. They had everything from modern to postmodern to contemporary to lean on, right? And I came with my very limited idea of what I thought art was, and I think for me, that first semester was extremely crucial, and I took a lot of those lessons and went back home, and I did this project called the Sweet Tea Party. In 2013, the Bahamas became independent from, we celebrated our 40th anniversary from the British, and so I made 40 teacups and 40 sauces, and I invited 40 Bahamians living in the Bahamas, or 40 people, rather, because the Bahamas is very like, oh, Bahamian, you're not a Bahamian because you were born this place and you have this last name and your skin color is this. And so I invited 40 people to have tea, one-on-one tea sessions with me, and we exchanged teacups at the end of each meeting, and so the work was this very discursive, again, socially engaged. Right? I think around that time, Theaster Gates was on everybody's mind, right? And so there was this Theaster moment happening in my practice. But it took me going off to school, and it took me having those bad critiques to those not so pleasant critiques, right? But that's what school is for. I think there's this idea that there's this fallacy that you go to school and you're supposed to be a perfect student and you're supposed to be ready and make gallery-ready work. No, this is a place for you to stumble and to play with new things and try new ideas and find your identity.
Let me just say real quickly, I have a friend, I don't think he's going to mind me telling this anecdote, Angel Latero, who's just an amazing painter.
Love Angel.
Yeah, Angel's fantastic, man. And he's originally from Puerto Rico and the other side of this good street in San Juan. And he went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and his first year was not unlike yours at Tyler. He'd never seen snow, among other things. And when he got to class, you know, the teachers were asking the students who were significantly savvier than he was, because he'd done mail-away study in San Juan. He'd learned how to paint literally on a mail-away sort of like learning thing that he'd paid whatever amount of money for, a couple $100. That was the extent of his art education. And so he's at the Art Institute, and they asked the students, you know, who are your favorite artists? Who are the artists you look up to? And he said Jackson Pollock, and of course he was laughed out of the room. And it took him, you know, a year and change to essentially sort of digest it, you know, and learn right quick and move forward. But that's, you know, that's if you can get over that, you're much stronger.
So I really enjoyed your comments. I thought they were both eye-opening and beautiful. So thank you for that. I have two questions. The first is, so if you don't have to do it all with your own 10 fingers, is it not on?
Yeah, it is.
I just wasn't close enough. Okay. So I have two questions. The first is, if you don't have to do it with your 10 fingers, if that was an eye-opening learning, what would your second most important eye-opening learning be regarding the life of an artist?
Ooh, that's a lot. Can we put a pin on that and come back to it? Yeah.
I think an easier one. Okay, so I'm intrigued about this concept of social practice. And so this question is, when you think about social practice as an artist, what does that mean to you, and how do you incorporate that thought into kind of how you work and practice?
Mm-hmm. I think that at the time that the social practice was really being defined as its own category of art production, I think at the time there was this real urge to sort of collapse the boundary between sort of social responsibility of what it means to be an artist, right? What it means to engage a community outside of your more traditional white box space. And I feel differently about it now, and I've always sort of struggled with this, right? Because are we the people who are taking care of neighborhoods and don't have excellent photographic skills? Are we calling what they do art? You know, and if we aren't, why not? You know, so I have complicated feelings about that. But I want to go back to the life educational question that you asked about what's the most important lessons that I've learned. Rigor, you know, it's all about rigor.
Over here and then in the corner.
Hello, Danielle. First, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the energy and the presence and the answers, the thoughtfulness you're giving.
Thank you.
It's just, yeah, it's just striking me. It doesn't happen often. So, and then I also had 2 questions. I came late. I was traveling from work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just wondering if you had any pushback growing up in a Caribbean household, like an immigrant Caribbean household, to pursuing art and just having that drive to pursue it anyway, because I've struggled over that. Never thought it could be a possibility, so I and then also, as someone who's lived in New York all my life and really just focused on work and what I have to do, and you mentioned New York being a wonderful playground learning experience school. So what's like, you know, 1 or 2 things you would recommend, you know, someone do experience to get in touch with art, thinking, and practice?
Yeah. So my family didn't realize that I was studying art until I until I got my associate's degree. And so remember that story about architecture? They thought that I was studying architecture, right? It was close enough to art that I was like, okay. And I think by the time they realized that I was studying art, I had already, you know, gotten some hometown love, a little bit of mentions in the press, and, you know, my mom's friends coming home and like, look, we saw your son, he was on the news, and, right? And so they're like, okay, well, so long as you're okay. So long, because I think of a lot of parents, it really boils down to, they want you to be okay. And that's why they want you to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, because that, in their mind, that's what okayness looks like. That's what it looks like to be able to provide and sustain for yourself. And I think in terms of experiences that were important for me living in New York, I think you have to find community, right? There's more than 8 million people that live in the city, yet sometimes the city can be very lonely, right? You gotta find the people who are gonna support you and lift you up and help point you in the right direction when you feel a little bit lost, or help like check you when you're screwing up, right? Like, Danielle, this isn't you. This, you know, whatever you got going on, you need to recalibrate or recenter. So I think it's that, and I also think it's not being afraid of hearing a no, if you know what I mean. Like, apply to everything. It costs you nothing to get a no. unless you paid for the application. But yeah, and I think also understanding that, the way that I think about it is when I do apply to things, if I get a no, that no isn't final. It's not total. It's just not right now. Yeah.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you very much. You said, you talked about your horror of going into debt for art education, which really got me thinking, have you ever gone into debt to make an artwork? And if not, like, and how does it get funded? And as an artist, your kind of artist, what percentage of art making is not about just doing the thing you want to do, like trying to realize your dream object, and is about trying to figure out a budget-efficient way to do what you want to do? What percentage of it is about economics? I think you talked about that a little bit in the prospect case, but that got me thinking about the economics of the whole thing, particularly because we're talking about the economics of art school.
Yeah, so many of my projects, I'm really bad with money, because I will spend every single penny I have to make my art, and I will pay everyone that helps me make my art, from the person that does the renderings to the person that cuts the plexi. But you know who often doesn't get paid? I'm trying to get better at that. That said, I've also been extremely well supported, and so I've gotten a few grants that allow me to do the thing that I do. And I think also, again, going back to this question of depth, right? Because I don't have that big, those six-figure numbers hovering around me, I can take those risks that allow me to do the thing. And also, I think residencies are really great and really important. I did them for many years. I spent 5 years on a residency circuit, and that meant that I was living very minimally, right? In a lot of instances, not really having to have a day job, but that minimal living meant that I was able to make the work that excited me and made me happy and that needed to be made. A lot of it lives in storage, so if you know anyone that's trying to buy some art. That said, I think, and in terms of this idea of budgeting and efficient ways of making and financing the work, this prospect project was a great example of that. And I think it's great to have people that are going to question and challenge and push you and sort of help to shape the way things happen, because I was fully convinced that I could make that $500,000 project happen 6 months ago. I would have turned over every stone in the world to make it happen, but at a certain point, the curators were really super supportive, and not that they didn't want the work to happen, but at a certain point it's like, okay, so even if you could find that amount of money, is it the right decision to put something like that in a city like like New Orleans, right, where people are really hurting, right? Yeah, so I think it also comes down to like these ethical questions.
Can I ask, the project that you're doing, is it fully or at least partially funded by the biennial?
It's a complicated question. How do I answer this in a politically astute
A little reality
way?
check here.
So the biennial did support, there's a gallery that supported, there's an organization that supported, but for a long time it just felt very, I think, it kind of felt like, I think a lot of times you go into these conversations thinking that there's champagne, and at a certain point you realize, ooh, that's actually Kool-Aid with a little bit of bubbly water. Which, and that's not to trash talk New Orleans, but that's Prospect, but that's just kind of the reality, right? A lot of artists that you see doing a lot of really groundbreaking, remarkable things, You know, sometimes you have to put ourselves in, you have to be very sort of clever about how you think about materials, and a lot of curators too, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, that brings us to time.
Can we ask one happy question? I don't like.
course.
Someone ask a happy question,
So
please.
do you
Just
have a
one.
question? Okay, final question before closing remarks over here.
Happy question.
All right.
No
well,
pressure.
It depends how you take it. Andrea, so you're surrounded by educators, artists, media. How do you choose to consume your information?
Ooh, I like this question.
I didn't hear it. Like, you
Can
wanna
I get
repeat?
this to you, please?
I didn't hear the end. Oh, how do you consume information? You're looking at me. They're asking you.
No, but I think you're
How do I
brilliant.
consume information? I get all my information on YouTube and on
Great.
Telegram or whatever it is. No, you consume as much information as you can. This is obviously from my perspective. And you check the shit out of it these days. You know, I think that's really fundamental. I have a 22-year-old who, not so much now, but maybe even a year ago, was coming to me with things that he'd seen on YouTube. I was like, dude, you can't get your news from YouTube. It's just like, it's not possible. You know, not in this household anyway. And that's a situation that is unfortunately fairly popular, right? So yeah, that would be my.
Yeah,
Read more books.
Yeah, I like that. I like read more books, and I'm also, I really hate to admit it, but I wake up every morning, and the first thing I do is, hey Siri, play NPR News. So I'm constantly walking around in anxiety and dread a little bit.
Thank you.
Well, on that happy note of anxiety and dread, Senya Noril here again, thank you. I mean, it is my, I guess should say challenge or opportunity to make some closing remarks for today's presentation. I don't know how to summarize this. I guess I'm going to begin by just reading off a number of different things we've heard throughout the day, including in this last incredible, really vibrant and dynamic and enrapturing conversation. You two, it's like you've done this before. So bear with me here. Debt, revelations, you will be fine, keep working. No one makes art alone. The most important thing is art and art making. Unencumbered freedom and to have the thing that you need. What else do I have here? Why here? Why now? In the service of art and artists, remember your first education, being and living in community, collaborative context, artistic citizen, the right moment, the right experience, imagine the unimaginable. And then this one is mine. What seemed impossible at the beginning has come together in the end. And that's exactly what I've been saying all week and all day as my colleagues and I, to whom I'm indebted, as we've come together to bring this day to all of you and to share in this space, in this place, in these ideas. It's befitting of the League. We are the birthplace of American art. We are an organization founded by artists for artists. We have nearly 150 years of affordable and accessible art education under our belts, and with all of you here, I feel like I can safely project we have 150 more. But I think it's really important that we've gathered here today for this very first symposium. And I look forward to this really, today wasn't the start of a conversation. This conversation has clearly been happening, is happening. All of you are having it in your own ways, in your own places and spaces, and with your own people. And what we've done today is really brought it together, and now you're all going to go out and continue this conversation. And hopefully you'll promise and you'll come back to us and have this conversation with us at future symposia, at future programs, because we have a lot here for you at the League. So all of that is on the backs of my amazing colleagues. Many thanks. I'm going to start from here up. Just kidding. No, first and foremost, Michael Hall, our executive and artistic director. My right hand, Esther Merdler, curatorial assistant, and the entire gallery team. Marketing, JJ Lunam, maintenance, security, front desk, everyone else at the League who's made today possible. Then, of course, our speakers. They've come in and out all day. They are extremely busy people. How we got them into one room, it's like mind-blowing emoji right here. These two, literally, off planes, off other engagements. It is a miracle everyone's schedule works. So thank you to our speakers on the stage, to our speakers on our two panels. You are what made today possible. Thank you. And finally, to all of you here in person and online, we see you. Thank you so much. The conversation in the chat has been spicy. The conversation in the room has been fire. Thank you so much for being here. Again, we look forward to seeing you back at the League very soon. So please join me for a toast up in our main gallery on the second floor, accessible via elevator and via stairs. Please show your bracelet at the door. There are also going to be some refreshments. And have a wonderful evening, and see you soon at the League. Good night.